Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Abdulhamid Al Ghazali, as you may know, and in this edition of the show, I am going to, of course, in response to popular demand, I'm going to provide a short summary of our previous readings on Segun Adeniyi's Power, Politics, and Death, which we had reviewed here for the past several weeks, perhaps. And this is supposed to be a summary for people who may not have had the opportunity to follow us up through the session. Power, Politics, and Death, as you may have known, was first published in 2012 by Mr. Segun Adeniyi, who was the spokesperson of late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, Nigeria's president, who passed away May 2010 while in office. The book tries to capture the behind-the-scene happenings in the presidential villa, leading, of course, to the death of the president just 2.5 or so years into his presidency. So the book has 17 chapters divided into two parts. The first part captures those issues that defined the beginning of the Yar'Adua presidency. The author termed it the defining moments. It captures late President Yar'Adua's plans and some of the major issues that he dealt with immediately after coming to the office. It has 9 of the 17 chapters under the part, and it covers such issues as Yar'Adua's 7-point agenda, which were the issues upon which the Yar'Adua campaign was built. The 7-point agenda includes such issues as commitment to rule of law, reform of the electoral laws, reform of the petroleum sector, and a number of other key issues. And the first part gave us a sense of how Yar'Adua went about dealing with some of them, how far he had taken them, the obstacle he had encountered while trying to implement some of them, and some of the major feats he had met in the early days of his administration. And there were other very fundamental issues which were not part of the 7-point agenda, but then Yar'Adua had, the presidency was confronted with, and Yar'Adua had a few reactions to them. And Femi Sheun helped us get a sense of some of the motives, some of the factors involved in those decisions. It captures the electoral reforms, the attempts to reform the oil sector, the banking reforms headlined by Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, who is now Muhammadu Sanusi II, the 14th Emir of Kano, and then such very interesting issues like the James Ibori, Awondaka Ribadu saga, the cat and mice outplay between the three people, the incident of Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalab, who attempted in 2009 to blow up a plane in the United States, the Boko Haram crisis, which also came in full force under President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, who gave very clear instructions to clear them out when it broke out June or July of 2009 on his way to Brazil, and his plans to contain the crisis once and for all. And Sheun tried to help us understand why the crisis degenerated later on, and which is why we are still dealing with the situation about 12 or 13 years later. And the work really captured what was, or what we can now call, the culmination of large-scale terrorism in Nigeria, the kind of which was really only familiar with happenings in the Middle East. And this crisis really appeared to erupt in other parts of the world since the 9/11 incident. Then other key issues in the first part: the impact of the 2008 economic depression on a global economy, and how President Yar'Adua was worried in trying to make sure he minimized the impact on the Nigerian economy and the efforts he had made. Then followed by the banking reforms, but most importantly, the appointment of Muhammadu Sanusi, then known as Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, as a CBN governor, at a time when everyone, or almost or a lot of people, were rooting for the reappointment of Charles Soludo for the second time. But for some reasons, President Yar'Adua went with Sanusi Lamido. Seun gave us some hints, some idea about the politicking factors that led to such a decision. And ultimately, also a very clear, very important aspect was Yar'Adua's reaction to the allegations and even the court case about his victory in the 2007 election, which many have described as being rigged and so on. So essentially, this was all that there were in the first part. And then the second part, understandably, gave us a look at the beginning of the end of the President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua presidency. Such things that kept on happening and until his death. The manifestation of his health condition and the many medical trips he had to take back and forth, and the consequences of these trips, and some of the power play that followed in trying to manage the situation. His many trips to Saudi Arabia, to Germany, and the dilemma this ultimately left members of the Federal Executive Council, the members of the legislature, and even the judiciary at some point, especially when the president left for nearly 8 months or thereabout, 7 or so, from November 2009 to May 2010, when he ultimately passed away. It addresses these issues that were then very familiar in the media space, very popular in the media space, such things as the cabal, these very powerful terms, the issues, for instance, of the doctrine of necessity, which the National Assembly had to invoke to cover up for the vacuum created by the president's longer stay out of the country, and the confusion the country was plunged into, how various power groups emerged, those rooting for then Vice President Goodluck Jonathan, those trying to, insist that the status quo remains despite the fact that the president was obviously not in a condition to govern the country anymore. The role of his wife, Hajja Toure Radwa, how at some point she was very helpless between the condition of her beloved husband and him being the president, and quite a lot of other things, how various political groups formed pursuing one thing or the other, and quite a lot of things until he ultimately passed away May of 2010, and how Vice President Goodluck Jonathan took over power from him. So this is ultimately all that there is in the book. It is an interesting read, and it offers a very important insider perspective of how governance played at the highest level in the country, and Nigeria being the largest black country, this is a lesson in governance for everyone, and that work will help people understand the options sometimes leaders are left with, the limits to their abilities, the power tussle they sometimes involve in and find themselves in, the forces that are really very influential in deciding or in shaping political decisions, even if these people are not always part of the government. So this is a summary of the work in response to popular demands, and will be offering summaries of all the books we reviewed subsequently. And so therefore do subscribe to our channel and follow us for more of this educative reviews. Thank you so much. Just in case you've forgotten, I am Abdul Hamid Al Ghazali.